As we come on the air this morning, things are going from bad to worse on Wall Street. Investors on another gut-wrenching ride this morning. Take a look at the big board. Stocks are still sliding big time. All the indexes down. You've got the Dow losing nearly 1,000 points in just the first 30 minutes of trading. So as we start the show, we're at 915 points down. We're going to keep an eye on that number as the morning continues. It's less than 24 hours after that nearly 1,200-point drop, the worst daily point drop ever, with the Dow on track for its worst week since 2008. Back here in Washington, you've got members of the House just leaving a closed-door briefing on the coronavirus, which is triggering all of this. Anger, for some of them, Democrats especially, is growing. One frustrated lawmaker in particular is joining us live as the number of new cases also ticks up. Everybody is still insisting this shouldn't be politicized, even as the president's right-hand man seems to dive into that thinking this morning, saying the media is now covering coronavirus because they think it'll bring down the president. What we're focusing on are images like this one. Nervous South Koreans lined up for hours at a department store to try to get their hands on face masks, a stark illustration of what is gripping the global community. And by the way, do those face masks actually help? Coming up, we've got 4 fast facts on key questions about the coronavirus from our medical expert. Ron Klain will also be here, the former White House insider who served as President Obama's Ebola czar. We've got our NBC News team ready to go. And let's start with those developments on Wall Street on coronavirus. We've got a lot of developments this morning. First of all, we're waking up to news that a Northern California woman is seriously ill. She's on a ventilator. This is the woman who's believed to be the first U.S. case of unknown origin. She didn't travel to China. She had no known exposure to anybody with the virus in the first place. You've also got the World Health Organization saying coronavirus has now spread to 50 countries, with Nigeria and New Zealand the latest. We're also following new reporting on a complaint from a whistleblower who claims some federal workers didn't have proper protective gear when they responded to Americans evacuated from China. Dominic Chu from CNBC is with us. Bill Neely is in Milan. Hans Nichols at the White House. Joel Kent in Long Beach, California. And Dom, we're going to start with you today. After our wild ride this hour yesterday, 24 hours ago, right? It seems like we are in for it, and so are the markets again this morning. What's going on?
I mean, we thought it was going to abate just a bit. Like you said, it was just this time yesterday, Hallie, that you and I were talking about the massive move lower in stocks, only to see it rebound in the midday and sell off aggressively into the closing bell. Like you said, down almost 1,200 points. That, by the way, has now brought the week-to-date period a 4,000-point drop for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. This also represents the fastest that the S&P 500 large-cap stock has fallen by 10% or more in its recorded history. It only took 6 days to get to that level of contraction in the markets. The reason why it is now important is because globally, the effects of the coronavirus are being felt not just in the economics, but in markets as well. Global stock markets in the first 6 days of the sell-off have lost around $6 trillion worth of value. $4 trillion of that is just in the United States alone. Now, the issue will be whether or not there could be anything done to stem that particular market onslaught. Hallie, what we'll be looking for right now is whether there are any developments now or over the weekend with regard to a slowdown in cases, not just in China, but elsewhere as well. Also, whether or not we will see headlines in the coming days and weeks about the number of people who have actually recovered from the virus as opposed to being admitted with some of those symptoms. But I will say this, if you're looking for a silver lining, we were speaking yesterday about the notion that people shouldn't be that worried about their 401ks, provided their time horizon. One thing that has happened in the course of the last couple of weeks is that mortgage rates have now hit near historic lows. So if you were a home buyer right now, you might have gotten some assistance from this coronavirus in the form of lower interest rates. That could be something to watch as well.
And down now, the Dow, more than 1,000 points at this point. Dom Chu, I know you are a very busy man this morning. Thank you for bringing some perspective to us. I want to talk to Bill Neely now, our NBC chief global correspondent who is in Milan. Hundreds of cases there in Italy, Bill, but talk to us globally about what the World Health Organization is saying this morning about the outbreak and the potential for it to be officially termed a pandemic here.
Yeah, Hallie, probably the grimmest warning yet from the World Health Organization, saying that all countries should expect that the virus will hit them. It names 3, Italy, South Korea and Iran, as being at a decisive point, and it says no country should make the fatal mistake of assuming that it will be spared. And that is borne out by the evidence over the last 24 hours. A dozen countries now reporting their first case. So as you say, 50, maybe more than 50 countries this virus has spread to. Britain getting its first death, a man who was on that cruise ship, the Diamond Crown Princess. Cases doubling in France. Iran, the biggest number of deaths outside China now, 34. China, indeed, just about the only bright spot, with cases falling there more than at any other time since January. And Hallie, nowhere illustrates the extraordinary spread of this virus better than Italy. Remember, this is the country that has the most cases, the most deaths in the Western world, 17 deaths, 650 cases. Travelers from Italy have actually spread this virus now to well, the ends of the earth, to Brazil, to Nigeria, the two most populous countries in South America and in Africa. So the spread of this absolutely stunning, just like the financial reverses that we're seeing day after day on Wall Street and across global markets. One footnote, Hallie, that I think is interesting. Amazon has just said that it's removed 1 million products from its website that were said to or claimed to protect against the virus or even to cure it. It seems that amid this pandemic, there are some for whom profit matters most, Hallie.
Which is disturbing in a lot of ways. Bill Neely, live for us there in Italy. Lawmakers back home in Washington are getting briefed about all of this, many of them just walking out of this closed-door briefing as the White House gets ready for an update later on this afternoon on the resources to fight coronavirus. Hans Nichols is there at the White House. So, Hans, I've been talking with my sources this morning who say, yes, listen, the vice president's office is streamlining the messages, the messaging. They're trying to get a handle on the comms and put it all through the VP's office there. There's also talk about politicizing this, with Republicans and the White House saying, hey, Democrats shouldn't politicize this. But then Mick Mulvaney goes out and makes some comments that are raising a lot of eyebrows.
Look, there's tensions in what Vice President Pence said last night, which is this should be above and beyond and outside of politics. And then Mick Mulvaney's comments just this morning, where he seems to be blaming the press, tying this into even the impeachment inquiry, calling it all a hoax.
The press was covering their hoax of the day because they thought it would bring down the president. The reason you're saying so much attention to it today is that they think this is going to be what brings down the president.
So here's what we'll actually see today. There will be a Penn and Pratt.
Fact check on that one, Hans. That's not actually why the press is covering coronavirus. I just want to make sure that that's clear to our viewers.
The press appears to be covering coronavirus because it's of great interest to the American people, to markets, and even to this White House. This is the story that everyone is focused on. And the White House acknowledges that, right? They have this briefing at 2 o'clock. Well, they'll have senior officials coming out and trying to talk about responses, reactions, maybe even a little bit on the new rate and what the rates actually are. And then in just moments, you're going to have Larry Kudlow, the director of the National Economic Council, talk on live television to a rival network on their business channel, talking about the administration's response. And remember, it was Kudlow's response. It was Tuesday, I believe, when he said that they have this contained all but airtight, and markets didn't believe that. And markets continued to nosedive. So we'll see to what extent markets are going to be reacting to Kudlow in real time here in just a little bit. Hallie?
There's also this whistleblower complaint, Hans, and a spokesperson that I talked to over at the HHS agency did not dispute this whistleblower complaint that a lot of people are talking about this morning, didn't confirm its contents either, that the Washington Post first broke. Bring us up to speed on why that's significant.
Well, it's a significant extent that it shows the level of preparation that you had throughout the government. And the core of the whistleblower complaint, according to the Washington Post, is that officials went into these quarantine areas without proper training and without proper protective gear. And what HHS is saying about this is they take all whistleblower complaints seriously, as you mentioned, without confirming the specifics. But this is the challenge for any administration on dealing with a global health crisis. There's always going to be the mechanics of the response, how you actually get people out there, how you message and have a single strategic message, and then the actual substance of what you're doing. And at least on the substance front, there's deep concern from Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill on how they plan to fight this, how they plan to spend for it, and what the overall strategy is. So there are a lot of different places that we'll be looking to for news today, not the least of which is Capitol Hill, as they voice their concern with how this is all being happened. Guys?
We're going to actually speak with a lawmaker who was in that briefing, whose district is in California, where the woman who we know is in seriously ill condition is working to recover from coronavirus. Also in California is NBC's Joe Kent. Joe, you're a little further south. You're down at Long Beach, right? Seems to be awfully quiet these days because of canceled imports from China, right? Talk to us about that, what the impact could be for the rest of us.
Hallie, we're here at the Port of Long Beach where it is eerily quiet. And if there's one picture I want to show you, if you're an American shopper or consumer, it's right behind me. Take a look at that port right there here at Long Beach. It is empty. I just spoke with the executive director of Long Beach Ports here, and he says it is empty precisely because of coronavirus and those cancellations coming from China. In fact, cancellations are double what they usually are. Here's what he just told me.
The impact's been significant. I mean, the port here, Port of Long Beach, this is ground zero for trade with Asia. I mean, primarily our imports, exports, overwhelming the percentage are with China. So when there's obstructions or disruptions in the manufacturing center there, the epicenter of the world in China, it's an impact here. What this means for the port is loss of volume. And what it means for consumers is your products might not be on the shelf. What it means for the community is people aren't going to work.
The big box stores that will be most affected, according to analysts we've been talking to, Walmart and Target. You may start to see, perhaps, if this continues, empty shelves or out-of-stock issues there. I also want to show you one more vision. Across here, this is the rest of the Port of LA. And then across the way, though, those blue cranes, that is also the Port of Los Angeles. So here you've got Long Beach, Los Angeles, two of the most important places where consumers are going to first get their goods. Not only are shoppers going to be affected here, we're talking about port workers, we're talking about the Coast Guard working full-time to stop coronavirus from coming into the U.S., monitoring any ships that are coming in from China. It is a quiet and eerily quiet scene here, Hallie.
Joel and Kent live for us there in Long Beach. Tom Chu, Bill Neely, Hans Nichols, thanks to all of you. There's an economic impact. There's a potential personal impact if schools do, in fact, move forward with closing, as some top White House officials are predicting could happen. I want to bring in now to give us a reality check Dr. Natalie Azar, our MSNBC contributor here. Dr. Natalie, we're glad to have you with us. There's so much, I think, confusion out there, misinformation about the coronavirus. We wanted to kind of get you to do this context check for us. So let me start with something that I've heard a lot just from people in my life outside of work, which is, should I be ordering face masks? Should I be spending all this money going on like Amazon, right, and ordering these masks and wearing them around? Does that actually help?
No. The short answer is no. The surgical masks that people are buying or wearing do very, very little, if nothing, to filter in the small viral particles that we know coronavirus has. In contrast, the particulate respirators that healthcare workers are required to wear, they're called N95 respirators, have to be specially fitted. There is an adequate supply right now, but according to experts I've spoken to, there is always the concern of a looming shortage of these. So again, for the general population, no need to wear any mask to prevent infection. If you are sick or having symptoms or taking care of somebody who is sick, yes, you can definitely wear one.
How long does the virus last on a surface, for example?
Okay, so the big answer to that is a big question mark because we really, really don't know exactly. But can we extrapolate from what we know about other coronaviruses? And the answer is yes. Believe it or not, these viruses can actually survive on hard surfaces for even up to a week. But we don't know if they're still virulent after that time or if they die with certain temperatures. So, and according to experts, really importantly, Hallie, that is not the primary way that these viruses are transmitted, aka touching a surface and touching your face. It's important, but the primary way that it is transmitted is through respiratory secretions. That is coughing and sneezing and getting those into your system from somebody else who's infected.
Okay, but let's listen. People can cough and sneeze without having coronavirus.
Absolutely.
Obviously, that happens all the time. You might not show symptoms of coronavirus right away anyway.
Right.
When does that start to happen?
Right. So basically now we're still saying the incubation period is roughly 2 to 14 days. That is from the time you're exposed until the time that you start having symptoms. In a series from a hospital in Wuhan, the most common 3 early symptoms were fever, dry cough, and fatigue, followed a couple of days later by shortness of breath. So those are the big ones, fever, cough, and shortness of breath, very similar to other respiratory illnesses, really indistinguishable from influenza, let's say.
What should you do if so let's say you've traveled somewhere. Let's say you've traveled to Italy, let's say.
Yes.
Even if you don't come back from China. You are worried. You're like, oh, I kind of don't feel good. Maybe I have a little bit of a fever that's low grade. I'm freaking. I'm going to go to my doctor. What do you do, right? Because the chances you actually have coronavirus are very, very, very tiny,
of course.
I would imagine.
Right.
But I think people hear it, and the hypochondriacs among us will go, wait a second, what's going on?
Right, exactly. So happily, Hallie, I can tell you that based on the case out of California, the CDC has now revised their recommendations in terms of testing for coronavirus.
And that's significant, right?
What's that?
And that's significant, right?
Incredibly significant, incredibly. So right now, this is the recommendation. If you have mild, what we call lower respiratory tract symptoms, that is fever, cough, and shortness of breath, and you have had contact with a laboratory confirmed case of coronavirus, with someone with coronavirus, you should be tested. The second level up is you have disease, fever, cough, shortness of breath requiring hospitalization, and you have traveled from any of those 5 places, Iran, Italy, Japan, China, or South Korea, you should be tested. And finally, if you're so sick, severely sick in the hospital, but without any epidemiological risk, aka no contact, no travel, you should be tested.
Dr. Natalie Azar with a great reality check for us. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
I was personally very concerned about the issue of testing. CDC sat on this issue for more than 2 months.
At the moment, we are not getting enough information from the administration.
Question number 1, which was what assurances that did you have the proper protocols were being followed during the federal quarantine? It was not a satisfactory answer.
That is new reaction from Capitol Hill just coming into us in the last few minutes as lawmakers head out of that closed-door briefing on the coronavirus we've been talking about. Democratic Congressman John Garamendi was in that room. He is joining me now. The newly diagnosed victim we've been talking about from Solano County, California, is his constituent. The first possible case of community spread, meaning, Congressman, of course, doctors don't know where she got sick since she had no travel to China, no known exposure. Can you give us any indication of how she is doing right now? Have you been in contact with her doctors, her family, anybody around her?
I do not have an update on her situation, although we know it to be very serious, and our hearts and prayers go out to her and her family. She was caught up in a very gross mistake by the Center for Disease Control that really didn't get into the control part of their job. They let this thing go. They didn't move quickly, knowing that the entire country of China was shut down, that there was an absolute fact that this illness was going to spread beyond China. And yet the Center for Disease Control failed to take immediate aggressive action to get ahead of this. And now we have community spread, and it's going to be in other communities around the nation. The question to us today is, so where are we today? Do we have testing facilities? Are we able to gear up? Is the money available to support all of these? Most of those answers are, well, it's in process.
So I was going to say, did you get satisfactory answers to those questions you just brought up in the briefing you were just at?
Yeah. Well, with regard to the whistleblower, they said, well, from March Air Force Base in Southern California, there was no breach of protocol. I asked about Travis, and they said, well, we'll get back to you later, and later will be this afternoon where we'll meet with them. Obviously, it was not successful at Travis Air Force Base. What part of those protocols of self-protection by the workers, we don't know. But we do know that it is in the community surrounding Travis Air Force Base. Now, with regard to testing,
now let me pause you there for 1 second, Congressman.
Sure.
Because I just want to bring people up to speed. You are talking about the whistleblower complaint as reported by the Washington Post that alleges that HHS staffers dealing at Travis did not have proper protective gear, did not have proper training, even assisting these evacuees. Obviously, the patient we are talking about, your constituent, is in this broader area. I want to be very clear. Do you suspect that there perhaps is a link to the actions that this whistleblower has alleged and the patient in your community who has contracted coronavirus?
The answer will inevitably be yes. How else did this illness get into the community? Most likely, high probability, it came from the patients, the evacuees that were brought to Travis Air Force Base that were served by local community workers bringing the food, working with the people. That's a high probability. We have a meeting this afternoon to get into that. There's the next step, and that is how then do we deal with the reality that the community is infected. That requires public health services, standard public health. Track it down, make sure people know what's going on, and make sure that there is testing available. And here's where the CDC really fell down on its fundamental task of making sure that test kits were available. To this day, test kits are not readily available throughout the United States. And just late last night, the CDC finally, after weeks of asking by the state of California to open up their laboratories so that the state labs could test this, the CDC said today, okay, you can go ahead. That is 2 months too late, and here we go with community spread.
You're very, I think it's coming through the screen, Congressman. You're angry. You're obviously visibly emotional about this. I want to ask you about the concerns that you raised in that room and about, I cover the White House as my day job for NBC News. The Vice President's office is handling all the communications and messaging. I understand that Dr. Fauci was at your briefing. Did he talk at all? There had been some reporting that he was telling associates that he felt like he was not allowed to speak freely, that there are concerns, I think more broadly, that the White House was trying to clamp down on people talking about, experts talking about coronavirus. Did Dr. Fauci address that? Do you share those concerns? Can you talk through some of that?
Well, insofar as I can repeat what he said, I was not muzzled. However, I was to go on the Sunday talk shows, 5 of them. The Vice President's office then took over the control of this situation and told me to stand down, not to do those shows. Now, you can draw your own conclusions whether he was muzzled or not, but clearly he was scheduled to do Sunday talk shows, and he was told not to proceed with that.
When you look at the discussion around coronavirus as it exists in the politics sphere, the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., was on this morning and suggested or said outright that Democrats are taking a pandemic, seemingly hoping, and I'm quoting, quote, "it comes here and kills millions of people so it can end the president's streak of winning." He called that a new level of sickness. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that comment from Don Jr.
He should not be near me when he says that. There
Why
would
not?
be a serious altercation. That is just totally outrageous. That is totally outrageous. I can assure you that there is not a Democrat or Republican in Congress that wants anybody to be sick. What we are concerned about is the administration's response to this illness. We've known since December that there was an epidemic in China. We've known since that time that there were Americans that were exposed to this in Wuhan and other parts of China. We know that there was a Princess cruise ship with high exposure and cases in Japan. Those people were brought back to the United States, frankly, with very little planning and very little preparation and no testing available in the United States to see whether they had the virus or not. Those are known facts. We also suspect that there was inadequate safeguards for the personnel that were serving these evacuees at the air bases. We'll continue to investigate that. We now know that there is community spread in my district. I know that there is an individual that's very sick. Don Jr. had better not get any place close to me. It would not be a healthy situation.
Congressman John Garamendi, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this morning, and I hope you give us an update after you have a chance to catch up with those officials at that briefing later on this afternoon. Congressman, thank you for your time. Right now on the 2020 campaign trail, candidates are battling for a last-minute lift in some key states. You've got Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders about to speak with supporters in South Carolina. The candidates hoping to land some new punches on their rivals and their rivals' records. To wit, watch.
One of the reasons I resent Bernie, though, is he wanted to primary Barack in 2012. He said he should be primaried.
Joe is not going to bring new people into the political process when people know that he voted for the war in Iraq.
NBC's Road Warriors are out in South Carolina covering this from all angles. Mike Memley is in Sumter, where that Biden event just started. Garrett Hake is in St. George, where a Sanders event is getting ready to go. And Ali Vitale is in Greenville with Elizabeth Warren and has new reporting on a big TV ad buy. Mike, let me kick it off with you.
Yeah, Hallie, well, you just heard those strong words from Joe Biden talking last night about Bernie Sanders, saying he resents him for discussing a primary challenge to Barack Obama in 2012. And that really speaks to, I think, the dual imperatives for Joe Biden right now. He's often collegial to a fault sometimes when talking about his fellow Democrats. But he's sending a strong message, especially at a time when just about every stop along the way in South Carolina, either the vice president himself or the introductory speakers are saying he has Barack Obama's back in the White House. And now the argument from Joe Biden himself is that Bernie Sanders did not. That speaks to the importance, of course, of the African-American vote, not just here in South Carolina, but a number of those Super Tuesday states to come. Joe Biden wants to establish himself here with a big win in South Carolina as the candidate who has the strongest base of support with African-Americans, because he also wants to make the message to Democrats that he's the best Democrat to unite the party against Bernie Sanders at a time when many Democrats are so worried about doing so. We've seen him do that in the past using Donald Trump as a foil. Now it's Bernie Sanders really very much in Joe Biden's crosshairs. But for more on the Sanders Sanders campaign. Let's send it just about an hour down the road to St. George, where Garrett Haake is with the Vermont senator. Garrett.
Hey, Mike, Sanders has been targeting Biden as well on the question of electability, but playing it back in a different way, saying that Joe Biden's not the candidate who can turn out the kind of voters and the number of voters that Democrats are going to need if they're going to beat Donald Trump. Sanders has been talking mostly about the president. When he talks about electability, he argues that he still beats Trump head-to-head in national polls. He pointed out yesterday a poll from Pennsylvania, I believe, where he was the only candidate to win, and is essentially, trying to do something in South Carolina that I would characterize as a fighting retreat. He's still campaigning here today. He's got two more events, still to go in South Carolina, but he's also campaigning in North Carolina yesterday, Virginia yesterday. By tonight, he'll be in Massachusetts on Elizabeth Warren's home turf, trying to work ahead into Super Tuesday. And it's interesting that he's there because just today his campaign has also put out a fundraising email to supporters, urging them to give to try to keep up the air war with Elizabeth Warren's new super PAC. For more on that, we go to Ali Vitale down the road in Greenville. Ali.
Yeah, Garrett, a few hours north from you up here in South Carolina, where Elizabeth Warren's going to be making a few stops before she hops back over to Texas tomorrow, where she's campaigning, continuing looking forward to Super Tuesday, even as voters go to the polls here in South Carolina. But I think the striking thing about Elizabeth Warren over the course of the last few weeks is the way that we've seen her transition from playing this game of politics by the rules that her campaign initially wrote for themselves to now playing this game of politics by the rules as they're traditionally written. I mean that in the way that she started going after her opponents with a lot more vigor than we've seen before, but I also mean that in terms of the fact that she's no longer disavowing super PAC help. We know that a few weeks ago, a PAC called the Persist PAC started popping up ads in Nevada, now South Carolina, but overnight I learned that they now have a new $9 million ad buy across Super Tuesday states, specifically California, Massachusetts, and Texas. That's on top of a $3 million buy that they announced earlier this week. That one encompassed 8 states. So Elizabeth Warren went from having no outside help on the airwaves to having more than $12 million in help on the airwaves. And it's notable that this PAC is on the air in Massachusetts. You mentioned that's a place that Bernie Sanders is going. It's also a place that Bernie Sanders is giving Elizabeth Warren a little bit of a run for it in her home state. So the Persist PAC stepping in there, getting up on the airwaves with a bit of defense of the Massachusetts senator. But I think the interesting thing here is the fact that on the debate stage this week, the attacks were flying, but notably nobody brought up this reversal from Elizabeth Warren, first who said she didn't want any outside help, now not disavowing it now that it's come her way. And I think the reason for that is because she's not the first person to make this reversal when money got tight. We saw Joe Biden do something similarly. Other candidates who are no longer in the race have also had this reversal before. And most of the people on that stage have outside groups helping them in one form or another. So not necessarily a clean form of attack as we head into Super Tuesday, where everyone needs both ground game and airwaves. Hallie, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Allie. And I want to go back real quick to Mike Memoli, because literally in the time that Garrett and Allie were talking, Mike, you got some new reporting on a key endorsement potentially in a Super Tuesday state for Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. We're actually going to see Joe Biden heading on Sunday to Virginia. And we just reporting now that Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, and of course the Democratic nominee for vice president to succeed Joe Biden in 2016, Tim Kaine, he's going to be endorsing Joe Biden. So that's another big boost, another sign of the at least establishment wing, the moderate wing, if you will, of the Democratic Party rallying around Joe Biden at this critical point. A big boost for him heading into that Super Tuesday.
All right, just goes to show road warriors working their phones even as other people are talking on TV, doing their live shots. Mike Memoli, Garrett Haake, Ali Vitale, thank you guys all. We'll see you throughout the day here on MSNBC. I want to bring in now our contributor, Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, a Black Lives Matter activist and co-host of Pod Save the People, who I think is fresh off a flight back from South Carolina. Brittany, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about Joe Biden. You heard Mike Memoli reporting that Senator Kaine is set to endorse him this weekend in Virginia, Super Tuesday. But before we get there, you got to get through South Carolina, right? What is the number that you are looking at that Joe Biden needs to win by, right? Because at this point, it's no longer a matter of win or lose, it seems, for him and the stakes that he's put on this. What are you looking at the margins here for him in South Carolina?
I really think that the gap between him and the second place person needs to be in the double digits. I think that's the only way he can really run away from this primary, first in the South, and actually be able to claim a solid victory that will take him into Super Tuesday. But the truth of the matter is that when I was talking to voters, especially the black voters that Joe Biden is dependent on in that state, they are reminding us that they are not a monolith. They are certainly talking about Joe Biden, but they're also talking about about Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. We saw that The Root today actually ranked the agendas for Black America for all of the candidates. Tulsi Gabbard came in 8th. Elizabeth Warren came in 1. Bernie Sanders was number 4. And Joe Biden was just behind Elizabeth Warren. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of these things play out. And I think it really will have to be a sizable lead for Joe Biden for him to claim the kind of victory that he needs to move forward in a Super Tuesday.
There's this new ABC News Ipsos poll looking at Democrats' view on who has the best chance of beating President Trump. And interestingly, it has Bernie Sanders at 34%, Joe Biden in second at 25%. And I wonder, when you talk to voters, obviously electability is top on their mind, right? Who can actually take back the White House? Does this sync with what you've heard on the ground?
You know, it's really interesting. It's a mixed bag as far as what I've heard on the ground. There are folks who want to make sure that we beat Trump, but also have a vision for the long term and really think about the America that we want to move into in the future. And I'm hearing that in particular from a lot of people who identify as progressive. But I'm also hearing from people that they're worried about the potential effect of Bernie Sanders, not just on down ballot races across the country, but also specifically in South Carolina. When we look at Jamie Harrison's challenge of Lindsey Graham, there are a lot of people who want to make sure that not just Donald Trump is beaten, but that Lindsey Graham is taken out as well. And Jamie Harrison, an African-American Democrat who has deep roots in that state, is having, quite frankly, a positively surprising run. He's been able to defy expectations for fundraising nearly every quarter, and people are worried about a Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket and what that could do to that race in particular in that state.
On that note, the New York Times has some new reporting on where former President Obama stands on all of this. And I want to read it to you. It says, quote, as Mr. Sanders, the senator's campaign gained steam a few weeks ago, Mr. Obama said he would enthusiastically support any of the candidates. But he added that the task of uniting the party around Senator Sanders could be difficult, according to an associate who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe a private conversation. It kind of sounds like maybe he's trying to walk a fine line here, Brittany.
He's certainly trying to walk a fine line. I think he's been very clear about that the entire time. And the truth of the matter is it's a bit of 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. We know that there might be trouble uniting people around Sanders. We also know that there might be trouble bringing Sanders supporters back in if there's a different nominee. So we're going to have a struggle here come the convention no matter what. But I do find it interesting that the place where President Obama has not been towing the line is on that ad that has been airing in South Carolina and in other places that has been incorrectly and falsifying the words that he spoke during one of his audiobooks to make it sound as though he is dissing Joe Biden. He was very clear on that cease and desist, and it was interesting to see that that was the place where he was going to weigh in heavily when he's been staying out for most of it.
Real quickly, do you think Senator Sanders can recreate that coalition that President Obama created?
I think it's possible, but what I think has to happen is that on the ground, in the organizing, folks are going to have to really have a mindset shift. The environment is incredibly toxic, and if people are going to feel invited into that coalition, then people actually have to be doing the inviting instead of the kind of divisive tactics that unfortunately we've seen from some of his supporters.
Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, great to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us this morning, talking all things South Carolina as we get ready for a busy 24 hours down south. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Are you going to see some schools shut down? Probably. May you see impacts on public transportation? Sure, but we do this. We know how to handle this. It's not a death sentence. It's not the same as the Ebola crisis.
That was more of what White House Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said about the coronavirus this morning, seeming to downplay the current threat to Americans while acknowledging there may be school closures, disruptions to public transportation, saying this is not the same as the Ebola virus. It comes as the World Health Organization just announced the risk of spread is increased and the impact as well to, quote, a very high at a global level, period. You can see their tweet that they just sent out right there. Speaking of Ebola, Ron Klain led the White House response to that as the first ever Ebola czar during President Obama's second term. He is now the co-host of Epidemic, a new weekly podcast on the coronavirus, as well as a consultant, we should note, for the Biden campaign. Ron, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot to talk about here. First of all, Mick Mulvaney saying essentially that we should not be at freak out levels. Does he have a point here?
Well, I don't think anyone should panic.
Right.
But I think to the extent the Chief of Staff was saying that this is some kind of political conspiracy or political attack on the administration, there are 3,000 people dead around the planet, more than 80,000 cases. Probably that's an undercount. It's coming here. The White House shouldn't be launching political attacks. They should be getting the country ready. And I think that's the question. What are they really doing to increase preparations, to get those test kits out, to get testing labs ready, to get hospitals ready for the inevitable influx of cases we'll see?
Sources that I talk to in and around the administration say, listen, yes, we are. The messaging is getting controlled through the vice president's office. That's not totally unusual that one office would try to actually funnel messaging and communications. That is something that a functional White House would do. There is this other concern about health officials feeling like they've been muzzled. I don't know if you saw our interview with Congressman Garamendi, who said Dr. Fauci told lawmakers today he doesn't feel like he's being muzzled, but he's not going on the Sunday shows because the vice president's going to do the Sunday shows. That seems like does that hold water to you? Is that a reasonable thing that maybe the vice president will want to go out and put that messaging forward?
No. I mean, look,
why not?
I think we need to hear from people who know the facts. The first month I was White House Ebola response coordinator, I did no press interviews. I was in there every day, 18 hours a day, making sure we were getting our systems ready to test people, making sure we were getting people on the ground in West Africa, making sure we were getting the things we needed to do to get our own healthcare system ready. Dr. Fauci is the nation's leading infectious disease expert and our most effective infectious disease communicator. The American people want to hear from him, not from a politician. And the idea that you would say he can't talk to the public without, like, Mike Pence saying, "Mother, may I?" is ridiculous. It's anti-scientific. It's not the right way to keep the American people calm down. We heard from the President of the United States, and the stock market fell 1,200 points and people freaked out. We need to hear from people who know what they're talking about, not people who are playing politics.
Speaking of the president, he made a comment during a pool spray that I was at yesterday, and I want to play it for you on when he thinks this could end. Watch.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows.
A miracle is not going to stop coronavirus. Science, medicine, a well-organized response will stop coronavirus. And, I mean, when I hear the president say that, that only adds to my level of concern about whether or not the White House is doing its knitting. Its knitting isn't spinning the virus, it's stopping the virus. And that means preparing our healthcare system, it means working with our global partners to see what's happening around the world. It means getting information. We don't see much evidence of that happening. We have a lot of evidence of the president trying to happy talk the virus away, not really try to stop it.
There are some things I think the administration officials would argue that they have been doing. They've been meeting with this task force for 6 weeks. I mean, I would imagine you'd have to
meeting with the task force for 6 weeks, but where are the testing kits? Why are we at a place where there are many parts of the country where there's no capacity to test people for this virus? Korea has tested 100,000 people. We've tested 500
hundreds.
people. Okay?
We've tested in the hundreds.
Yeah.
They've tested
So why are we so far behind? Go to your local hospital, ask them, do they have beds ready? Do they have the equipment?
If you were the czar, what would you be doing now? If you were named, if the president got up and said, "Ron Klain, you're my coronavirus czar," what's the first thing you'd be doing?
So the first thing I'd be doing is getting a list of what the tasks are that need to be done to get ready for the fact that this virus is coming here. It already is here. It's going to start to spread here. And so we need to make sure our healthcare system's ready to test, to isolate, to treat. And that needs to happen fast.
And very quickly, speaking of the virus already being here, that whistleblower complaint from HHS alleges that there were workers that were interacting with these potential patients with not the right protective gear, not the right protective training, for example. Congressman Garamendi is among the first, I believe, lawmakers to explicitly draw a link between that patient in California and this whistleblower complaint. How significant is that to you?
Well, first of all, I don't think we yet have the evidence to know that that case in California is tied to that.
Completely right on that.
We should be careful about drawing conclusions. But I think the information from the whistleblower complaint shows the kind of chaos and confusion in the response we're seeing. That's why we need strong coordination at the White House. We need a plan. We need action on that plan. And that's what's lacking right now.
Ron Klain, thank you very much for being with us. I appreciate you taking the time this morning.
Thanks, Hallie.
Coming up, back to the 2020 trail and a question. Can you maybe troll somebody? One candidate's campaign today looks like it. South Carolina is having a primary tomorrow, if you haven't heard, but Republicans who want to vote for a Republican are kind of out of luck. That's because state party leaders canceled the GOP primary altogether. Remember? First, since Ronald Reagan ran for a second term in 1984, it was part of an effort to try to bat down long-shot primary challenges to President Trump and cement his all-but-certain renomination. And even though some Republicans who dissented said this wasn't okay, a judge disagreed and gave it the green light. South Carolina will have a general election this year, of course, and the president wants that red state to stay red, even though the state is flooded with a whole lot of blue right now. So, not wanting a spotlight stolen, the president is heading to the Palmetto State later on.
We have tremendous popularity in South Carolina. We're going to go down. Some people have said I'm trolling the Democrats, and maybe I am.
NBC's political reporter Monica Alba is in North Charleston ahead of the president's rally tonight. Mon, I don't know if you can, maybe half troll or if it's either a full troll or a no troll. Whatever it is, the president's doing it.
This is a committed troll, Hallie, certainly. We saw it in the first 3 states, of course, Iowa, New Hampshire, last week in Nevada, and now here in North Charleston. We're going to see it again tonight. I'm told by the president's aides that he saw what happened in those first 3 outings, how great the response was, how much of the local media they were able to dominate, and he said, I want to do it again. Let's go for a 4th time. Let's do it in South Carolina the night before the open primary here. And some activists on the ground are actually encouraging registered Republicans to vote for Bernie Sanders. And now that's something they can do because it is an open primary, but the campaign and the state party has distanced themselves from that. But tomorrow, I think we're going to see some of those folks coming out to vote for him. And of course, as you mentioned, there is no GOP contest, but the president will be touting his record here in South Carolina, a state he won in 2016. And I think we can also expect him to be talking about his general election opponent. And he likes to kind of handicap and talk about the different ones. You will see him probably talking about that debate this week. And I think you're also going to hear him talk about coronavirus. And just anecdotally, Hallie, I talked to a couple of the president's supporters here, and they told me that they are not too concerned yet about the virus. They said they did tune in to the president's news conference this week, and they actually pointed to some of those stats about the flu, and that's where they said most of their concern is right now. But I think we're going to talk to a couple more folks here to hear him talk about that, as it's certainly going to be on his mind as he heads here to the Palmetto State, Hallie.
Monica Alba live for us there in North Charleston. Mon, thank you. We want to get back to Wall Street before we let you go. Another check of the markets about 90 minutes into the last trading day of the month and the last trading day of what has been a very rough week. Right now, you've got all the indexes down a lot. The Dow down 785 points. Since Monday, the Dow's been down more than 4,000. MSNBC's Ali Velshi is with us. Ali, percentage-wise, right, this isn't as bad as what we saw in years past, but numbers-wise, you can't understand. This is still dramatic.
No, I mean, there's 4 numbers. 3 times this week, we've had 4 numbers in that with the negative sign. I mean, that's kind of incredible. Percentage-wise, look, the good news is we blew by so many things in the last few days that the next record that we would have to blow by is a long way from this. So look at that. Look at this week. This is this week alone. It has been very hard for me to recall days like this. We're right now at about the 7th or 8th largest point drop, but I kind of want people to put that out of their minds because percentages are what matter here, and we're not anywhere near the top 10 percentage drops. Now, for the week, we're off, I'm guessing, 12%, maybe 13% right now. The worst week of the financial crisis, which ended October 10th, 2008, we were off 18.5%. So the good news to me is that we're way off of that next record, and I'm touching a lot of wood around here. We're not going to get there today. I would say this, as much as some viewers don't like to hear this, this isn't panicked selling. The markets aren't locking out. We've not seen trading halts. We're not seeing those kinds of problems. It is high volume, but through the course of the day, you see this market going up and down. It's struggling, which means there are still buyers in this market. There are people who say, whether it's 6 months from now or a year and a half from now when we have a vaccine for this thing, this too will end, and are buying into this market. So I would caution people to look at history, look at long charts of the market, look at what happened after 9/11 when all of those losses came back in exactly 30 days, and just remember that things are more resilient than they seem. This is not to say this is not serious. It is remarkably serious, and we'll continue to cover it. But it is not actually panic selling. It's just heavy selling because of uncertainty.
Ali Velshi with MSNBC. Ali, thank you much for putting in perspective for us. I always appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching this hour of MSNBC Live. A busy one, a newsy one, and more ahead throughout the day as we cover both of these huge stories. I'm headed over to the White House, Ayman Mohaldin, who is up in New York, but I will see you from over there later on this afternoon.
Sounds good.